There are these stories from history that are so powerful, so famous, they just feel like solid bedrock truth. But what if I told you that some of the greatest stories we've all been told, well, what if they never actually happened? Let's dive in and find out.
I mean, we all know this one, right? A little George Washington, that poor cherry tree, and this, unbreakable sense of honesty. It's the story that's supposed to define the integrity of America's very first president.
But what if the story about the lie is a lie itself? And that's really the big question for us today, isn't it? We are going to pull back the curtain on these tales we think we know so well and try to separate what's real history from what's just a really, really good story.
All right, so let's start with that very tale, the one about George Washington and his hatchet. It's honestly the perfect example of a story that wasn't created to report history, but to actually shape it.
So here's the reality check. The story? It never happened. Not a bit of it. A biographer, a guy named Mason Locke Weems, he just completely made it up. And get this, he added it to the 5th edition of his book years after Washington was already gone. His goal wasn't to be accurate. It was all about creating a powerful moral lesson for a brand new country.
And that really gets at a much bigger idea here. It seems we have this habit of, manufacturing our heroes. We create these amazing myths to build up a national identity, or just to make these historical figures seem totally larger than life.
Okay, case in point, William Tell, the legendary Swiss folk hero, right? His story is basically the cornerstone of Swiss independence. He's this incredible marksman who bravely stands up to a tyrant.
But here's the plot twist. There is literally zero historical evidence that William Tell ever even existed. And the story itself, it's practically a carbon copy of an older Danish legend about a hero named Palnatoke. So yeah, it looks like Switzerland's great founding hero was, probably borrowed.
Speaking of heroes, let's talk about a number. 300. That number is legendary, isn't it? 300 brave Spartans standing all alone against the massive Persian Empire at Thermopylae. But the real number of Greek soldiers who were initially holding that pass, it was actually closer to 7,000. So, a lot less lonely than the story suggests, but as we're about to see, no less heroic. So here's what really went down. A combined Greek army of about 7,000 soldiers held that pass for 2 whole days. It was only on that final, desperate day that the famous 300 Spartans, along with about 2,000 other Greeks, made that legendary final stand. I mean, it's still absolutely incredible, but it definitely wasn't a solo mission. And this pattern, it's not just for warriors and heroes. It happens in the world of science, too. We just love the idea of that single eureka moment, But what these stories really do is they simplify a long, complicated process down to one single, dramatic flash of insight.
I mean, we've all seen the cartoons, right? The apple falling from the tree, bonking Isaac Newton right on the head. Now, Newton himself did say he was inspired by watching an apple fall, but that whole comical bonk on the head thing, that was added way later. It wasn't about a head injury. It was the start of a deep, profound question.
And it's pretty much the same deal with Archimedes. While the story about his bath is ancient, most historians think that the best part, him running naked through the streets shouting Eureka, was probably added later just to make an already good story absolutely unforgettable. And yeah, the actual science was probably a little more complicated than just watching the water go up.
Okay, now we're getting to one of my absolute favorite categories of historical myths. All those famous last words and iconic quotes that were, never actually said by the people who supposedly said them.
You know the one. Let them eat cake. This one single quote has defined Marie Antoinette for centuries. It's made her the ultimate symbol of a cold, callous ruling class, completely and totally out of touch with her starving people.
Except there's a huge problem with that story. She almost certainly never said it. See, a nearly identical phrase was written down by the philosopher Rousseau back in 1767, and they attributed it to some unnamed princess. At that time, Marie Antoinette was just a kid, still living in Austria. She didn't even set foot in France until 3 years after that was written.
And what about Julius Caesar's legendary last words? Et tu, Brute. It's the ultimate moment of betrayal, right? Well, it's the ultimate moment of drama, written by William Shakespeare more than 1,600 years after Caesar was actually killed. The historians who were actually around back then, they say he either said nothing at all, or maybe he said something in Greek like, "You too, child." So this brings us to the really big question, doesn't it? If all these famous stories are just fabrications, or huge exaggerations, or just plain wrong, why do we keep telling them? Why on earth do they stick around?
Well, the reasons they stick around are actually really powerful. Think about it. These stories take complex ideas and make them simple and memorable. You get a clear, easy moral lesson from George Washington's honesty. You get a jolt of national pride from William Tell's rebellion. You get a simple picture for really complex physics with Newton's apple. And I mean, let's be honest, a genius getting bonked on the head by an apple is just a way more entertaining story than hearing about years of boring calculations.
So maybe we shouldn't just write these off as historical mistakes. In a weird way, they're a different kind of truth. They're like windows, you know? They show us exactly what the societies that created them valued, what they were afraid of, and maybe most importantly, what kind of heroes they needed to believe in.
And that leads to one final, much more personal question. If history is filled with these incredibly powerful and persuasive myths, what are the stories that you accept as fact right now that might be shaping your entire view of the world? It's a fascinating and maybe even a little unsettling thing to think about.